It is what it was, what it shall be. All right, we're back again. Doing today's video, part 2, which is the series on Qabalah versus Tantra. Okay, so let's try to pick up where we left off last time. So if you didn't watch the last one, this will be a little bit a jump in to some serious shit. But let's just say there are certain people and programs in this world that use the concept of trauma-based mind control to fragment and fracture the personality, okay? So think Jason Bourne, right? If anyone's seen The Bourne Identity or read those books, super key, tons of hidden information. And with these books, there's always books and movies that contain tons of super secret information, but it's presented in such a way that's somewhat fantastical, all right? It wants to seem like so detached from everyday experience, right? So like most people in their lives and their close friends and families, probably they may not know someone who's a super spy and got dumped out into the ocean to die or something like that. They might not know that. Or someone that has like, you know, induced amnesia and stuff like that. They may not know someone like that. So they look at this movie and they think, oh, this is just a funny story. It's like, you know, it's like a comic book or something like that, you know? And also, you know, these events that are depicted aren't always super literal, right? It's like metaphorical and allegorical, right? So, but couched within these big dramatic stories, there's tons of little bits and pieces of key information to where once the overall schematic is revealed to you, you can go back and be like, oh, this little detail is referring to this and that are real world things and real world events that have happened, right? But let's just talk about that thing of fracturing the personality through trauma, right? So when the human psyche is faced with traumatic events or most importantly, events and information that cannot be smoothly integrated into their day-to-day life, right? They will compartmentalize that information, because the key thing about the human brain, it's like very similar to a computer chip in a lot of different ways. In fact, most of our modern computing is actually based on the brain and how the brain works. And one of the key factors has to do with crystals and how crystals can store energy and information. Okay, and the same is true of the brain. And just the same way, like a computer doesn't judge the information that's presented to it at the root physical level, the brain doesn't do that either. It's at one of these higher order levels that does that. So think about how, you know, I know most people are probably pretty computer illiterate, but let's just say there's a way, if you get into your computer, you know, with a Windows or a Mac, right, which is multi-layers of abstraction from what would be considered machine language level, you know, the root level of binary and stuff like that. So there's all these layers of abstraction that allow different degrees of access to the information that's contained therein, right? So like for a basic level, tard level computer use, if you go into Windows, or I assume Mac has a similar thing probably, I'm not as familiar with that, but if you take a certain folder, like say you have your desktop folder, or you have your recycle bin or something like that, or, you know, photos, you know, these different folders that you can create. If you look into that folder, there's stuff like read only or hidden files, right? Hidden files. So that shows how there's information contained in there that you have to kind of shift your functionality. You have to use your super user or administrative privilege password to like get into that information, right? But it's there, right? It's on the disk. It's in the data. And then there's stuff like how you can partition a hard drive. Like I used to have a computer where it had a Windows partition and a Unix partition, right? So these two different operating systems that access the hard drives in different ways, right? So that's kind of how this system works, is that, you know, they want to compartmentalize a person's consciousness so that only under certain circumstances will this different information be accessible to their awareness, right? And so they use really uncomfortable situations to try and fragment the personality. Situations largely fear and trauma. That's not the only way to do it, right? You could equally well use bliss or any kind of stimuli, really. But the thing is, you would, for these types of purposes, you would want it to be some kind of very, very specific things so that you wouldn't accidentally, in the course of normal everyday life, like get into these secret files, right? So with that movie, The Bourne Identity, you can start to see how this works. It's like, imagine a spy, right? A spy is going to go do some super secret shit that they don't want anyone to know about. And if he gets caught behind enemy lines, or if he gets somehow intercepted by someone who they don't want to have this secret information, you know, they're going to want him to not reveal that information, or they're going to want to have some kind of, you know, security measures, let's just say. And so this is how the trauma induction functions, right? So that within an individual, there's these different like folders or different partitions of their hard drive that contain secret information that cannot be accessed under normal circumstances, right? So again, going to pop culture, if anyone may have seen the movie The Manchurian Candidate, either the old Frank Sinatra version or the Denzel Washington version, both of these movies kind of tell this story of this like programming process that goes on. Now, no matter who you are, whether you're a janitor or a super spy or anything in between, everyone has these layers to their consciousness, and under certain circumstances you can access these different layers, right? So let's take past life regression, for example, or traumatic memories or stuff like that. It's things that are in your brain that under normal circumstances you would not access, right? But under certain either traumatic circumstances, blissful circumstances, a sleep state, hypnotic state, etc., you kind of can get the password to these types of information, right? All right. So this is the dark side. This is kind of the Qabalah, is they want to create these secretive partitions of the consciousness that don't communicate with each other, okay? So one of the ways that they do that is by creating what they call alters, right? Alternate personalities, alter ego, stuff like that, right? And so they use a lot of symbolism, they use color and sound, they use passwords and key phrases. And this is something that you'll get into in the Qabalah. Like if you're looking at the Qabalah in kind of this occult type of way, they'll talk about it as going through the heavens and seeing these like angelic guardians or like different beings that are going to give you like the pass to go into different realms, right? That's kind of how it's described. But equally well, this can be internal into the consciousness, right? And so now what's interesting is how almost everything I've just described is also present in Tantric Buddhism. However, there's a much different approach with that system. Because whereas in the Qabalah, they tend to want you to think of these angels and terrifying beings and gods as literal, physical, immutable, like materialistic or, concrete realities, right? Whereas in Buddhism, if you're actually properly taught, the most core concept of Buddhism is voidness and interdependence. So in essence, they would be teaching you that whatever projections of your subconscious are present, angels, demons, devils and gods, it's all just a projection of your own consciousness, right? So when you would be doing like a tantric spiritual practice, you project out the image of the God, right, from your own consciousness, and then you could dialogue with it or learn from it or whatever like that. But at the end, you withdraw it back and you remind yourself always that this is just a phantasm of my own mind. Like, this doesn't have the power over me. Like, I have the power over it. I created it. I destroy it. And at the end, you wind up back where you were at the beginning. And so in essence, it's a little bit more empowering, right? So you would never have this idea of, oh no, this devil is going to punish me, or this God's going to reward me. Like, you never think of it that way. You think of it in terms that the gods and devils are all aspects of our own consciousness, right? And so if we have internal attitudes such as fear and shame, feelings of powerlessness, whatever, that appears to us as a demon, right? Whereas if we have fears of empowerment, if we have, not fears of empowerment, if we have concepts of empowerment, if we have concepts of divinity within, and mercy and grace and so on, then these same exact energies will appear to us as a benevolent helper, a teacher, an angel, and so on. But reality, there's no essential existential difference between these two different manifestations. It's more of just an attitude of approach, right? So this is what I'm trying to get across, is the following. Like, whatever external benefactors or villains we perceive in the world around us, they do not really have true power over us, and that the real power lies within us. And this is what our whole social structure and our whole system today is trying to get us to exist in this duality mind and the materialistic mind, so that in every circumstance we look at our own power in an externalized form. And so thus we have a response of either fear, submission, awe and reverence, and so on, never realizing the power of universal mastery is internal to us. And so, this is why I keep trying to tell people, and no one seems to listen, is be careful what you put into your consciousness and how you conceptualize these things that you put into yourself, right? If you're worshiping heroes in the outer world, or you're trying to imitate some role model, right, you're in essence foregoing your own spiritual power, and you're always going to be subject to the dominion of these externalized concepts of power, beauty, etc. And internally, you're going to always feel your own self as this weak template of submission that always has to look externally for power, inspiration, guidance, etc. When the opposite is actually the fact that all power is your proper purview within your own self. Now, to put this in the context of Tantra, right, there's phases in the tantric type of sadhana where in the beginning phase, like, you visualize these gods, right? And you say, oh, these gods are giving me wisdom. These gods, I'm praying to these gods. I'm bowing to the gods, or I'm like trying to bring the gods these offerings, right? But as you progress now, so in the first stage, like, you'll visualize the god as external, right? Then in the middle stage, you kind of visualize the god as like part of you, but like up above. So you're like, okay, well, this god is going to, I'm going to feed this god with my energy, and then this god is going to feed me back with blessings and grace and knowledge and so on, right? So that's kind of the middle phase. But then the final completion phase is where you withdraw the god back into yourself, and you see the god as aspect of your own being, right? But because we start off with this concept of ourself as weak, limited beings, in the beginning phase, we have to work with it on that term, because we're not used to visualizing ourselves as possessing this godlike power. And to immediately jump to that for most people would be hazardous. So it's like a teaching tool where we first approach it as this reverence kind of concept. But ultimately, the real truth is that we possess all the positive attributes of these deities within. And so even though these are two 15-minute videos, this is not even 1% of this total topic, but I'm trying to just give a gradual introduction to people with the overall message that the future is about us owning our own power. Whatever method you have to use to get to that, this is the ultimate result.